Ali Rafa is at the White House, and you and I were talking, Ali, when this first was released by the Qataris and Hamas. And David Noriega, our correspondent there in Israel, was telling us you now have more information about what the White House was going through during that time.
That's right, Richard. In just the last few hours, we had reached out to the White House, to the National Security Council, when we heard this news from Hamas that there had been a delay as to this hostage release. Then we again followed up in light of the news from Qatari mediators that this deal was back on. And in just the last few minutes, our team has heard back from White House and NSC officials, a White House official saying that, quote, "We are working with Qatar, Egypt, and Israel on implementation of this multi-day ceasefire, this deal to release hostages." And the White House and NSC giving us a bit of detail that was going on behind the scenes as the president remains in Nantucket, wrapping up his family vacation after the Thanksgiving holiday. They say that the president was briefed throughout the morning on the state of the hostage deal implementation. At 10 a.m., he spoke directly with the Emir of Qatar and the Qatari prime minister on potential holdups to this deal and mechanisms to resolve them. Following the president's call, they say senior U.S. officials were in regular contact with the Israelis, the Qataris, and Egyptians to overcome hurdles to its implementation. They say the president was briefed throughout the day. That's in addition to the several briefings he received from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan yesterday. And then they wrap up by saying at 1:30 p.m., White House officials learned from the Qataris that the deal was back on and the ICRC was moving to collect the hostages. The president was also updated on the latest development. So the last few hours, Richard, just underscoring how incredibly fragile and sensitive these negotiations have been since they started when this war began. That's something that the president and White House officials have stressed for 6 weeks now, how incredibly fragile this was, how every piece to this puzzle had to fit perfectly for this to be able to come to fruition successfully. But no doubt a sigh of relief for the president, for U.S. officials who worked painstakingly on these negotiations behind the scenes.
Yeah, Ali, what you're reporting is exactly what we were learning just within the last week about how involved this president was in the last, 7 to 10 days to get this agreement done. And yesterday, during his comments, as you were reporting earlier, he was saying that he had made several calls just within recent days to make sure this deal was brokered and did start. It started a day late, as we all know, and as we were reporting, for various small but very large details. So this president continues, Ali, to be very involved with this process, even on this, and again, lack of a better word right now, but this hiccup today.
Absolutely, and that's something that we have continued hearing from White House officials since this war began, that the president was heavily leaning on his foreign policy chops, on his decades-long relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu to be able to have a very direct and personal connection to these ongoing negotiations. He talked just yesterday, as this deal was being announced, about the constant communication and the behind-the-scenes diplomacy he's been directly engaged with over the last few weeks, speaking multiple times to not just Prime Minister Netanyahu on a regular basis, but also the leaders of Qatar, of Jordan, of Egypt. Qatar, of course, spearheading this effort to be able to communicate with Hamas and play this role as mediator to be able to get this hostage deal accomplished. But the president, as you said, very directly involved in these negotiations that are still ongoing. We heard the president and U.S. officials say that they're hopeful that Americans will be among the hostages released as part of this multi-day ceasefire, including at least 3 Americans, the 2 women and a 4-year-old girl that the president says he hopes will be released as part of this 4-day-long deal. But at this point, there is no indication that those people will be released today, but there's still no indication also that they won't be released. As we saw, the first 2 hostages released by Hamas were Americans, an American mother and daughter that were released 2 weeks after the war began, Richard.